Story 1. As a property manager, you meet all kinds of people. Most tenants are fine, maybe a little messy, maybe a little quirky, but nothing you can't handle. Then there are the others, the ones who make you pause before knocking on the door, the ones who leave you with a gut feeling you can't shake. I have a tenant like that. I refuse to inspect his place alone. I won't do it. If something's broken or there's paperwork to drop off, I always bring someone with me. I just don't like the guy. The first time we met, he told me he had back issues. I was being polite, trying to keep things professional, but he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Maybe I should pay a woman to stand all over me." I let out one of those awkward, nervous giggles, unsure how to respond. But then he leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something low and serious. "Then again, maybe I'll want women to keep walking over me afterwards." I stopped giggling. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I didn't want to ask. The second time I saw him, I was dropping off some documents. It was a quick visit. I just wanted to hand him the papers and leave. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know what I need?" A glass of scotch and 2 bullets. I tried to keep my face neutral, but something about the way he said it, the bluntness, the weight in his tone, made me freeze. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it like a man stating a fact. Then he added with the same flat voice, "The second bullet's in case I missed the first time." I know that's an old phrase, I've heard it before, but coming from him in that moment, it felt wrong. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was going to turn up on the evening news, dead or worse. It wasn't just the things he said, though. It was the way he acted. He has a giant freezer under the house, one of those chest freezers with a lock on it. It sits in the crawl space, and he doesn't like anyone going near it. The first time I noticed it, I mentioned needing to check the area for maintenance purposes. He cut me off. "That's not necessary," he said quickly, almost snapping. "It's fine where it is." I let it drop. Some things are better left unquestioned. Then there's the washer and dryer. The unit came with the house, a nice functional set that was supposed to be convenient for tenants. But when he moved in, the first thing he did was disconnect both machines and drag them into the center of the bathroom. He positioned them over the drain, perfectly aligned, so they blocked the whole thing. When I asked why, he just looked at me and said, "It's better that way, for everyone." "For everyone?" I repeated, confused. "Yeah," he said. And that was it. He didn't explain. I didn't push. I just nodded and left. I don't ask many questions anymore. Of course, he's not the only unsettling tenant I've dealt with. There was another renter in a different unit, a younger guy, always a little off. He'd call the office at weird hours, ranting about people spying on him or asking strange questions that didn't make sense. One time I inspected the property while he was out and found bottles of chlorine stacked in the kitchen. No pool, no explanation, just chlorine. A few weeks later, the cops showed up at our office. They asked if we knew anything about the tenant, if we'd noticed anything strange. I told them what I could, but they didn't say much. Later, we found out the police had discovered a meth lab in the house. That one was unsettling in a different way. It was less personal, more chaotic, like the house itself had been poisoned. But with my other tenant, the one with the freezer and the washer-dryer barricade, it feels different. It's quieter. He's never loud, never combative. He pays his rent on time and rarely complains. And yet, there's something about him that keeps my hand hovering over the doorknob every time I need to go inside. Maybe it's the way he looks at you, too still, too calculating. Or the way he talks, blunt and cryptic, like he's testing you with every word. Or maybe it's just that damn freezer sitting under the house like it's hiding something no one should see. I've stopped trying to figure it out. It's easier not to know. I send maintenance workers in pairs now and make sure someone always knows where I'm going if I have to stop by. Most of the time, he doesn't give us trouble. But still, when I walk away from that house, I always feel like I'm leaving something behind. Story 2. As a real estate agent, you learn to read people. Buyers come and go all the time, some serious, some just browsing, but most are predictable. I've worked with every kind of client, from newlyweds full of excitement to picky retirees. And even the ones who seem a little off usually don't set off alarms. But these guys, They set off every alarm I have. It started with a phone call. A man and his son were looking for rural vacant properties, places out of the way, isolated. That wasn't unusual. Some buyers dream of quiet land far from neighbors. But from the start, something felt wrong. They claimed another agent referred them to me, someone I didn't know, which was odd in itself. I wasn't interested. "You'll need to bring me a pre-approval letter or proof of funds," I told him, my voice polite but firm. Most buyers who don't get immediate attention just move on. They're not that loyal, but this guy wouldn't let it go. He called again and again. Persistence can be normal in real estate. People desperate for a deal, people chasing a dream. But this wasn't that. It felt like I was the one being chased. The oddest part was how specific he was about what he wanted. Rural homes, far off the main roads, vacant. He emphasized no neighbors more than once. As an agent, I'm used to fielding unusual requests. People have their reasons for wanting privacy. But something about his insistence turned my stomach. "How remote are we talking?" I asked at one point. His answer was calm and immediate. "As remote as possible." When I pressed for more details, like what kind of budget he had, he was evasive. "I just need you to find something," he said. "Don't worry about the money." That's when I put my foot down with the pre-approval letter. I wouldn't work with him otherwise. A few days later, my office phone rang while I was out. The secretary called me immediately. "Those two guys," she said, her voice low and shaky, "they're here. They came in asking for you." "Okay," I said slowly. "What's wrong?" "They're just weird. Big guys acting nervous, like they don't know what to do with themselves." I heard her move, probably walking away from the desk, lowering her voice. "I don't like it." That was enough for me. "Give one of them the phone," I said. A pause, then the muffled sound of her handing it over. "Hi," I said as evenly as I could. "Like I told you before, I need proof of funds or a pre-approval letter before I can show you any properties." The man didn't argue. He just said, "Okay." That was it. They left the office shortly after. When I got back, I called the agent they'd supposedly been referred by. Her voice was clipped when I introduced myself. "I don't know you," she said immediately, confusion in her tone. "Why would I send you clients?" I described the men, two large guys, one doing all the talking, while the other hovered nearby. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. Finally, she said, "Oh my God, they came here too." She explained how it happened. The two of them had walked into her office days earlier, unannounced, just like they had with me. Something about them had unsettled her and a colleague, a gut-level unease they couldn't shake. "They were nervous," she said, echoing my secretary. "Sweaty, pacing, acting like they didn't belong there." She went on to say how, as they stood in her office, they kept glancing at the front door, as if expecting someone or something. The one who did the talking would ask vague questions about listings, but they never gave straight answers when she asked for their details. "They didn't want to tell me anything real," she said. "It was like they were testing us, testing how much we'd let them get away with before we asked questions." It got so bad that she and her coworker quietly called two male agents from their office, asking them to come quickly. When the first guy arrived, the two men froze. They didn't say a word. They just turned around and left. "Did they drive off?" I asked. That's the weird part. We went to the window and watched them leave. They didn't have a car. They just walked down the road on foot. I felt a chill crawl up my back. Rural properties, no car, nervous, pacing, and walking away. What were they looking for? And why did they seem to move from one office to the next, trying to meet with agents they didn't know? The other agent did some digging afterward. The man had given her a name, said he was from another state. When she looked into it, she found he was married, though he'd never mentioned a wife to either of us. The details didn't add up. His story frayed at the edges like a rope about to snap. I didn't follow up after that. I didn't want to. But I learned to always trust my instincts. The second you feel like something's off, it probably is. Story 3. The first call came at the end of March. A tenant in Unit 5 left a voicemail complaining about water damage. "There's a leak in the ceiling," she said, her voice clipped with irritation. "It's dripping onto my bed. Can you fix it today?" I sighed, scribbled a note, and drove over that afternoon. Unit 5 was on the second floor of the building, and there was no plumbing above it, only the attic. When I inspected the ceiling, it was dry, bone dry. No stains, no damp patches, no sign of anything wrong. The tenant showed me where the water had dripped, even pointing to a small stain on her bedspread. But the ceiling above was clean as a whistle. Maybe it had been condensation, or maybe she'd spilled something and didn't want to admit it. Either way, I left unconcerned. A week later, the same tenant called again. This time she sent a video. In it, water visibly dripped from her ceiling, splashing onto the floor in a steady rhythm. I replayed the clip 3 times before heading over. When I got there, though, the scene was the same as before. No moisture, no damage. Her frustration was palpable, but I couldn't do anything. "Let me know if it happens again," I said before leaving. It happened again and again. Soon, tenants in other units started complaining. Unit 3 reported wet carpets. Unit 7 said water was pooling under their appliances. I called a plumber, who inspected the entire system and found nothing. The pipes were intact, the water heater wasn't leaking, and there was no evidence of flooding. "Honestly," he said, scratching his head, "it's like the water's coming from nowhere." By the end of April, I was spending more time at the building than at home. One tenant emailed me a photo of water dripping from a light fixture, which made no sense. There were no pipes above that area. When I arrived to investigate, the fixture was perfectly dry. My patience was wearing thin. I decided to check the attic. It was cramped and dusty, filled with insulation and cobwebs, but there was no sign of leaks or water damage. I started to think my tenants were pulling some elaborate prank. Maybe they'd seen the same TikTok trend or had a group chat dedicated to messing with me. That theory crumbled when I noticed something in Unit 9. The tenant there had complained of a persistent, musty smell, so I went to check it out. While inspecting the closet, I saw a faint water stain on the floorboards. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but when I pressed on the wood, it felt soft, like it had been soaked and dried repeatedly. Curious, I pried up the boards. Beneath them, I found a hatch, a small square door with a rusted handle. It was hidden so well that I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been looking for something. My heart thudded in my chest as I tugged it open. The smell hit me first, damp, sour, and earthy. I shone my flashlight into the space below and saw a sub-basement I hadn't known existed. The water was ankle-deep, stagnant and filthy, rippling slightly as I leaned closer. Debris floated on the surface, scraps of fabric and what looked like clothing, tangled and waterlogged. I nudged one with my flashlight beam and realized it was a t-shirt, its print barely visible under the grime. Squinting, I made out the faded logo of a band, Pink Floyd. The triangle prism and rainbow from Dark Side of the Moon were still faintly visible, the colors muted by years of decay. As I scanned the area, I saw more. A denim jacket lay half submerged, its sleeves spread like limp arms. A Nirvana patch fraying at the edges, clung stubbornly to one side. A pair of bell-bottom jeans floated nearby, their pockets sagging with water. Further in, something shiny caught my eye. It was a sequined vest, the kind I'd seen in photos from the disco era, now bloated and coated in silt. None of it made sense. Why were these clothes down here? How long had they been here? And why hadn't anyone noticed this space before? I climbed down into the sub-basement, the water soaking my boots. The walls were rough concrete, crumbling in places, and the floor sloped unevenly. My flashlight's beam flickered across the surface of the water, catching on more debris. I saw a pair of boots, heavy and black, standing upright in the corner, as if someone had just stepped out of them. The faint smell of mildew and decay clung to everything. At the far end of the sub-basement, I found a small tunnel carved into the wall. It was just wide enough for a person to crawl through. The water trickled into it in a thin stream, disappearing into the dark. I crouched down to peer inside, but the tunnel seemed to go on forever. The walls were damp, the edges jagged. It didn't look like it was part of the original construction. I didn't go in. When I climbed back out, I stood in the tenant's apartment for a long time, trying to decide what to do. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. An investigation would raise too many questions, and the building's value would plummet. Any hint of a crime or hidden structural issues could scare off buyers for years. I couldn't afford that. Instead, I sealed the hatch, replaced the floorboards, and moved on. The complaints stopped shortly after, and the tenants seemed satisfied. Maybe that was cowardly. Maybe I just didn't want to know the truth. Story 4. Managing properties isn't as easy as it sounds. Sure, it's not back-breaking labor, but the constant maintenance, tenant calls, and turnover are enough to keep you on your toes. I've been doing this for years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people are unpredictable. Some tenants leave things spotless, others leave behind a mess, and then there are the ones who leave you wondering if they were all there to begin with. Harper was one of those tenants. He lived in apartment 3B, a small one-bedroom in a quiet building. Harper was the type of tenant you barely noticed. Polite but distant, always paid rent on time, never had any complaints. For 2 years, I barely heard from him. Then out of the blue, I got an email. "I've moved out. Keys are in the mailbox. Thanks for everything." No notice, no explanation. Just like that, he was gone. I figured it was a new job or a sudden move and didn't think much of it. I had a new renter lined up for the place, so I went over to check the apartment. The sooner I could turn it around, the better. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air felt thick, like the windows hadn't been opened in months. At first, everything seemed normal. Some dust, a few empty cans on the counter. But as I walked through, I started noticing the weird stuff. Every door in the apartment had been taken off its hinges. The bathroom, the bedroom, even the closet doors. They were all leaning against the walls, stripped of their hardware. The doors themselves were fine, but the hinges were gone. I found a small pile of screws and hinges shoved into a corner of the living room, as if Harper had taken them off systematically and left them there. The closets were even stranger. Both of them were nailed shut, with thick nails driven deep into the frames. I had to use a crowbar to pry them open. When I finally got the doors loose, I found nothing inside. No damage, no stains, just empty space. The nails didn't make any sense, though. It wasn't like the closets were broken or dangerous. Why go through the trouble of sealing them up? Then there were the lights. Every switch in the apartment had been rewired to control a single bulb in the kitchen. None of the other fixtures worked. The bathroom light didn't turn on, the bedroom lamp didn't work, and the hallway fixture was dead. Just that one bulb in the kitchen, humming faintly as it cast a harsh, cold glow over the room. I tested the switches a few times, hoping it was a simple electrical issue, but no luck. Someone had done this on purpose. It was frustrating more than anything. I had a new tenant ready to move in the following week, and now I'd have to spend time and money undoing all of this. I chalked it up to Harper being eccentric, maybe paranoid or obsessive, but the more I looked around, the harder it was to shrug off. The windows were sealed with duct tape around the edges. The bathroom mirror was missing, leaving a discolored rectangle of drywall above the sink. A flashlight sat on the bedroom floor, its batteries corroded, and a pile of crumpled paper was stuffed into the kitchen trash. I pulled one out and smoothed it flat. It was a to-do list scrawled in shaky handwriting. Remove hinges, tape windows, check locks, keep light on. The last item was underlined twice. I took a photo of the list with my phone and made a mental note to email Harper. I wanted to ask what the hell all this was about, but I doubted he'd respond. He didn't leave a forwarding address, and his phone number went straight to voicemail when I tried calling. Out of curiosity, I looked him up online that evening. No social media, no LinkedIn, nothing. It was like Harper didn't exist outside of this apartment. The next morning, I brought in a contractor to help me fix everything. We replaced the hinges, patched the closet doors, and rewired the lights. By the time we finished, the place looked normal again. Clean, functional, ready to rent. I thought about calling the police, but I decided against it. I had a new tenant eager to move in. Any kind of investigation would delay the process, and I couldn't afford that. Time is money in this business. The new renter moved in a week later. I didn't mention the alterations. They weren't relevant anymore, and the place was as good as new. But every now and then, I think about Harper's to-do list, the closet doors nailed shut, and that single light bulb burning faintly in the kitchen. I never did hear back from Harper. He didn't answer mail. I keep hoping that he was just eccentric. Story 5. In real estate, persistence is usually a good thing. Buyers who know what they want tend to close faster. And for an agent, that's a win. But there's a fine line between persistence and obsession, and Mr. Carter crossed it. The first time Carter called me about the house on Westfield Drive, he sounded eager, almost desperate. "I need to see it," he said, "as soon as possible." It was a modest listing, a 3-bedroom with a decent yard, the kind of house families love because it's simple and practical. There wasn't anything remarkable about it, but Carter was insistent. I set up a showing the next day, and he arrived early, pacing on the sidewalk when I pulled up. He was polite enough, clean cut, maybe in his early 40s, but there was an edge to him I couldn't quite place. As we walked through the house, he moved slowly, running his hand along the walls and pausing in every room, as if committing it to memory. In the master bedroom, he stood by the window for what felt like an eternity, staring out into the backyard. "It's perfect," he finally said. "I'll make an offer." I explained that there were already offers on the table and that he'd have to move fast. He nodded but didn't say anything else. After the showing, I assumed he'd either make a competitive bid or move on. But Carter didn't move on. Over the next few days, he called me repeatedly. "Have the sellers decided yet? Are there any other showings? Can I see it one more time?" When I told him the house had gone under contract, he didn't take it well. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight. "Maybe they'd take a higher offer." I assured him it was a done deal and figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I was driving to another showing when I passed Westfield Drive. Carter was standing on the sidewalk in front of the house. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at the front door. I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Mr. Carter?" I called. He startled and gave me a sheepish smile. "Just saying goodbye," he said. Then he walked away. It was odd, but not the strangest thing I'd seen in this business. Sometimes people get attached to houses for reasons they can't explain. I let it go and focused on my other listings. Then the late-night calls started. At first, I didn't connect them to Carter. The number was always unknown and the caller never spoke. I'd answer, hear nothing but faint breathing, and hang up. After the third or fourth call, I stopped picking up. But the calls kept coming, once, sometimes twice a night. One evening, I was at home going over contracts when my phone buzzed again. This time, the caller left a voicemail. I hesitated before playing it, but Carter's voice came through clear and steady. "It's not theirs," he said. "It's mine." I deleted the message and blocked the number. The calls didn't stop. A few days later, I got a text from the new owners. "Hey," it read, "do you know someone named Carter? He's been outside the house for hours." I called them immediately. They told me Carter had knocked on their door that afternoon, asking to come inside. When they refused, he stood in the yard staring at the windows. He didn't leave until it started getting dark. I was ready to call the police, but the owners said they didn't want to escalate things unless it happened again. "It's probably nothing," they said. "Just a guy who got too attached." But I couldn't let it go. That night I searched for Carter online, and eventually I found a foreclosure record from 5 years ago. The address was just a few blocks away from Westfield Drive. The house had been demolished to make way for a new development. The name on the record was Jonathan Carter. I didn't know what to do with the information. Was Westfield Drive a substitute for the home he'd lost? Had he lived there before the remodel? None of it made sense. A week passed without incident, and I started to think he'd finally moved on. Then last night, I got another voicemail. It was short, just 6 words, but it sent a chill through me. "They don't deserve it. I do. I haven't heard from Carter since. And the new owners haven't called again. Part of me hopes he's moved on, found another house, or made peace with whatever drove him to fixate on Westfield Drive. Some buyers don't let go, but what does he even keep? I am not sure about what do too." Story 6. Selling houses is usually straightforward. Some are easier than others. A fresh coat of paint, a good school district, and you're golden. But when Mrs. Jacobson asked me to list her family's old farmhouse on Birch Hollow Road, I didn't expect it to turn into the most unsettling experience of my career. "It's been in my family too long," she told me when we first met. "I just want it gone." She seemed nervous, almost evasive, but I didn't press her. Sellers are strange sometimes. Family attachments, painful memories, you name it. The house itself was charming in its way. A big wraparound porch, hardwood floors, and enough land to make it attractive to buyers looking for space. Sure, it was isolated, sitting right on the edge of a thick forest, but for the right person, it could be perfect. At least that's what I thought. The first family to tour the house loved it. A young couple with a toddler and another on the way. They spent nearly 2 hours walking through every room. They were already talking about where to put the nursery when they left, and I was sure they'd make an offer. But the next day I got an email. We've decided to pass. Thanks for your time. No reason, just a sudden change of heart. It was strange, but not unheard of. I moved on to the next showing, another young couple who seemed just as enthusiastic. They left with smiles and promises to call, but by the following morning they were out too. By the time the third buyer backed out, I was starting to feel like something was off. They didn't even make excuses, just vague emails about changing circumstances or thinking it over. It wasn't until the fourth family that I got a hint of what was happening. They left abruptly just 10 minutes into the showing. The wife looked pale and the husband muttered something about weird vibes as they climbed into their car. I was locking up when I noticed movement near the edge of the woods. It was faint, just a shadow slipping between the trees, but enough to make me pause. The next day, the family called to back out. "We're sorry," the husband said, "but someone approached us after the showing. He said the house isn't safe." "Who?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "I don't know. A man, maybe late 50s. He came out of the woods." I felt a chill creep down my spine. I didn't know what to make of it, but I called Mrs. Jacobson to ask if she'd ever had problems with trespassers. She was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "Just try to sell it quickly." Her avoidance only made me more uneasy, but I had a job to do. The next few showings went the same way. Buyers would leave excited, only to back out after some kind of encounter near the property. They always described the same man, scruffy, older, with a wild look in his eyes. He told them things, cryptic warnings about the house, the forest, or the people who used to live there. I decided to stay late one evening after a showing, determined to catch whoever was sabotaging the sales. As the sun dipped below the trees, the property grew eerily quiet. I stood by the back porch, scanning the edge of the woods, when I heard a rustle behind me. I turned just in time to see a figure darting around the side of the house. Without thinking, I ran after him, shouting, "Hey, stop!" He was fast, faster than I expected, but I caught up to him near the tree line. He turned abruptly, and before I could react, his fist connected with my jaw. The world spun, and I hit the ground hard. The last thing I remember was the sound of his footsteps retreating into the woods. When I came to, it was dark. My head throbbed, and my cheek was swollen, but I managed to stumble back to my car and drive home. The next morning, I called Mrs. Jacobson and told her I was done. "I can't sell this place," I said. "Who is that man?" Her voice was flat. "You don't want to know." That was the last conversation I had with her. A week later, I contacted a demolition company and arranged to have the house torn down. It wasn't my call, but I convinced her it was the best way to get rid of the property. Once the house was gone, I put the land on the market instead. It sold within a month. I moved to a different state not long after that. Maybe it was the punch, or maybe it was the lingering fear that I'd see him again. Whoever that man was, he wanted that house empty. Nobody owns it now. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support our work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.